welcome Jen Janson to our Listen.Better podcast. Very excited to have you on our screen today. We worked together many moons ago when you were back in the UK, but now you're in Canada. So I'm dying to catch up with you to hear more about your world. So tell me, how did the pandemic affect you and OMERS Ventures?
I think it might be interesting for your viewers or listeners to understand a little bit of context before I get into how it affected me and where I am now. Because when I sold, my husband and I sold 6 Degrees, our PR company in the UK, we decided pretty much on a whim to take 2 years off and go to Canada, where I have family. And we brought our youngest son, our 2 eldest were still in university. And we were just going to enjoy it and do some traveling and spent time with family. And about a year in, slightly less than a year into that, the pandemic struck. And so that coincided with me also starting to get really bored and feeling like I had no purpose to my life, nothing that was kind of giving me structure every day. So I'd started having conversations with interesting people in the Toronto business scene. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I was thinking maybe I'd start some consulting or something. And so that's a long story, which I won't go into, but I ended up speaking to the managing partner of OMERS Ventures. And within 45 minutes, we both kind of figured out that we really wanted to try and find a way to work together in some capacity. And about 6 weeks later, I was employed full time. So I ended up, I think I worked in the office for 3 months until the pandemic struck and we were sent home. And so for me, learning to, first of all, work for someone and in a pandemic where I had all these new colleagues and wasn't really getting to know any of them face to face was a really, really interesting challenge. So it's been a learning experience. I've not had a job anywhere else than in a pandemic. So it's hard to know how it's really affected me. It's been just a huge, huge learning experience. I think the biggest thing is that no one with the kind of expertise that you and I have ever lived through something like this. No one really knew what the right thing was to do. We have a portfolio of about 60 startup companies, all of whom were trying to figure this out at the same time, and many of whom we were working with hand in hand. So yeah, it's been an eye-opening experience.
Thank you for that background. So what would you say you've learned about yourself as a leader? And you've made that contrast between running an agency and now being in-house. So some big differences. So if you can set aside the pandemic as a unique part of that, in terms of how you approach managing teams and the challenges you've come up against, what are the key differences, and what have you learned about yourself in those challenges?
I think the biggest one is having led an organization for the better part of 15 years, I suppose. I really liked not being a leader. I loved being an individual contributor, as my type of role is called, where I basically just get to practice my craft. And I'm able to lead by influence rather than by line management. That said, and I said that coming into the role, I'm really happy to just be me. There's no expectation that you give me a team. I'm happy to just work it out on my own with agencies if I have to or whatever. Since that time, I have been given a small team to work with. And I think as a result of that, when I look at my kind of different leadership style now from when I had my own agency, I'm much more relaxed and not afraid to give feedback where feedback's warranted. I have the confidence of knowing that anything I'm trying to teach people comes from a good place. And I think if you give feedback well, it's often well received. So that's been a big learning for me. I think for much of my career, I was afraid to give feedback and I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. And I don't know. I don't know if it has as much to do with going from agency to in-house or owning my own business to now I'm part of another business, or if it's just age and the wisdom that comes with age.
I love that. You mentioned the Toronto business community, and that when you went out there first, you started having interesting conversations with interesting people. So among those, have you identified some mentors, or have you got people that have been in your life for much longer than that? How have you approached in keeping your network strong, having now moved abroad?
I've maintained my network in the UK. It's definitely my strongest network. And I did have a formal mentor who I worked with for many, many years. His name is Philip Blackwell. And he came out of the publishing world. And he was just always a wonderful outlet for me to kind of question some of what he heard me saying and challenge my own thinking. I've worked with him less since I've moved over here, which I do miss. But when I was reflecting on who I really considered to be mentors, an interesting thing came to me, which was there was one person who kept coming to my mind. And funnily enough, I think if you asked her, she would say I'm her mentor. And her name's Toby Ruth at a Beacon. She joined me to work as my PA at 6 Degrees many years ago. She's probably 7 years ago now. She's since gone on to work. She left us to work at Snap, the parent company of Snapchat, and has since left Snap to work at Netflix. And she's risen up the ranks. I think I'm not sure exactly what she's doing now, but she was a international PR manager at one stage. And watching her navigate some of the tough situations that she did, she just does it with such grace and understanding and empathy. And even when she was coming to me with challenges, she was wise beyond her years, and that always inspired me. And it also keeps me connected with the younger generation, I suppose. It makes me sound really old, but I feel like I get possibly more out of that mentorship than I give. So yeah.
Grace, elegance, and understanding. Those are lovely words to describe someone's approach in business. More of that needed, I think. So how do you stay motivated? What gets you out of bed in the morning and makes you run up the stairs or up those lifts I can see in the background?
I absolutely love what I do. I feel like, and people have heard me say this, I feel like the last 25 years have all led me to where I am today. And it's hard not to be motivated when you get so much fulfillment from what you do. And the fulfillment comes really from the fact that I work with founders every day, tech founders, who are all navigating similar challenges. And I'm able to offer them real advice based on experience of companies who've been through exactly the same thing. So I'm able to help them shortcut making the same mistakes that others have made, or most often it's just give them the confidence that what they think they should do is actually correct. So loving what I do is my biggest motivation. And then it's really about wanting to be a good role model for my children, two older daughters and a younger son, and to show them that it is possible to have it all. I mean, it's hard, really hard. And my husband and I have created an environment where he lets me thrive in my career outside the home. He, although he ran 6 Degrees with me when we had the business, he's a freelance writer, but he's since taken responsibility for everything at home. It's very clear to me that I couldn't do what I do and pursue the career that I'm pursuing without the 100% backup of my husband doing what he does with our family and at home. So I do, being able to be that role model for my kids is really important.
That's great. You've got that teamwork in place. So bravo to you for co-creating that with your husband. Jen, we met some years back, and you were always very passionate about data, which is why we worked together. But how are you using data now? You've mentioned several or many tech companies you're working with. So presumably data is key to everyday life. Tell me a bit more about how you're using data when formulating strategy at OMERS.
I can talk about it from two perspectives. So the first is, as a venture capital firm looking at early stage tech companies, data is critical. And we have been really really trying to lead the way and challenge our own boundaries when it comes to using data to surface companies that are interesting. So we have a whole team, well, a whole team. All of our whole operations teams are like one or two of us, but we have a couple of very smart individuals who are consistently tweaking our use of data to help surface interesting companies that we might not ordinarily come across. The second area where data is really important is in what I do and helping to really build and reinforce our reputation. And one of the things I'm sure I've talked about in the past with you is I do believe there is a good formula for building a positive reputation, and purpose and values are the foundation of that formula. I feel like everyone knows that these days. For me, the great multiplier is behavior. And if you're not behaving in line and doing actual concrete things that demonstrate what you say is important to you, then your reputation will be short-lived. Communications for me is the kind of the cherry on top, that you communicate about what you're doing with the right audiences in the right way. So when we look at data to figure out whether or not those things are working and how we measure our reputation, I've long been a huge advocate of trying to create a reputation dashboard. For me, that's not a dashboard that just shows kind of social media and traditional media metrics and sentiment and tone of voice. That's one small part of it. And I think it's important to be able to measure that stuff because it's, for the most part, unbiased and subjective. But the other areas that are really important are, and these are levers that you can pull to build your reputation. So in a venture fund, making sure that your returns are on that dashboard, because a venture fund is judged by the companies we invest in, by how well those companies do, and also by the people we have. So employee engagement is another really big one to have on that dashboard, because a healthy company will have a very engaged employee base. And then we also look at, founder net promoter score. So that's a good one. And then the final one is really DE&I, so diversity, inclusion, and equity. But how we look at it, the reason I'm hesitating over it is because I think there's so many different parts of DEI that impact a company. For us as a fund, we know that it's important to find the best companies. We need to kind of fish outside our traditional pool. And so identifying founders who are underrepresented in some way is really important. And we can, if we're tracking that, we can measure if that is actually shifting the needle. So that is one of the things that we take very seriously. And we also measure the diversity and inclusion within our portfolio companies, so within their employee base. And that's something that's been really fascinating to work on.
Really interesting. So return on investment, employee engagement, NPS, DE&I. So you've got your work cut out, plenty of metrics to be absorbing there. So just looking to the future now, what do you think you might do differently, if at all, in the coming few years? What have you learned about yourself that you're going to take forward and do things differently?
One of the things I've learned that we haven't really touched on yet is I really do believe, based on my experience over these last 2.5 years, that we will be most successful in building our company's reputation or enhancing it if people see the benefit of what we're doing and feel it, not because they're just asked to do it. So that's what I'd like to do more of. I'd like to continue to work really closely with our investment professionals and prove that creating great content and getting it out there will improve your deal flow. And the feedback loop in venture capital is so long that ultimately what I'd love to be able to prove is that those connections that you made as a result of something that you wrote or a speaking opportunity that you had in 2018 means that you invested in a company in 2020, and then maybe in 2027 that company becomes, a massive unicorn or what have you. And it's a big picture that I'm really trying to look at, and just taking it one day, 1 month, and then 1 year at a time.
Excellent. And then finally, because I don't want to take up too much more of your time, who or what inspires you, and what's the bit of advice you'd give back to your 18-year-old self?
Gosh, that's two big questions. So I'm very inspired by, well, I'm inspired by a lot of people. I'm particularly inspired, especially having moved back to Canada, by my sisters. So I come from a family of 3 girls or women, sorry. And one of all 3 of us are doing very different things, and we're all really successful at what we do, and we really enjoy what we do. So one of them, Allie, is in genetics and working kind of innovative medical field. Another one is in the film industry, and she's been really, really well recognized as a woman who is leading the way in film, and particularly in encouraging diverse voices to be more heard. So they inspire me a lot because I learn from what they do. The advice I'd give my 18-year-old self is to think way beyond what you believe are the opportunities for you to work in. So when I was 18, I know I was thinking about traditional routes, kind of business or law or medicine, and I gave no thought to what a future might look like with the sort of innovation that we have today. And I'm not sure I ever could have predicted it, but I know that this is prompted by the fact that I work in a field where we see truly the cutting edge stuff. And I do it when I speak to my nieces. I'm kind of a real evangelist for trying to think beyond what your guidance counselor might talk to you about, because those are the traditional routes. So
it's more a case of what we'd be telling our 18-year-old selves here and now in 2022. That's interesting, with all the innovation and possibilities. Can you just give me a little pen portrait of one of the companies that you are supporting at OMERS, without revealing the name perhaps, but just an idea of what they do?
Yeah. So there's one company which is, we've been talking about autonomous vehicles for years now. It might even be decades. And there's all kinds of challenges with autonomous vehicles. And really, there's a lot of people who don't believe we're going to ever see them on the road properly. And we're working with a company. It's a woman who is an absolute genius in this space. And she took a really courageous view, which was to say, the industry has been working on this for so long now, that we're so invested in the technology that exists that no one has looked up to see what's new today and how can we take advantage of it. And so she's essentially created a platform to test autonomous vehicles in a simulated environment, so that one of the problems is, if you're in an autonomous vehicle, a driverless car, and it's snowing and a child is playing outside in the snow and they trip and they fall in front of the car, you can't really plan for those scenarios with humans, because there's way too many scenarios. But with computing today, you can run billions and billions and billions of scenarios and create a simulated environment so you can test a driverless car in a safer space. And so this woman has just taken on the industry and has decided to do this and work with all the major manufacturers. And it's really, really inspiring. So yeah, that's one.
Very good. Well, I look forward to seeing case studies of that in years to come as they grow and become a unicorn company, as you described.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. Real pleasure seeing you again after all these years, and hope to see you in real life at some point.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.